Ladies and gentlemen, we live in the most information-saturated age in human history. Never before has so much data been so instantly accessible, so endlessly repeated, and so confidently presented. Yet, paradoxically, genuine wisdom seems rarer than ever. We are drowning in information but starving for understanding. We are informed but not necessarily intelligent. Being smart today is not about having faster access to facts or louder opinions. It is about the ability to discern truth from noise, signal from propaganda, and wisdom from mere cleverness. The modern world rewards speed, outrage, and conformity, but intelligence demands patience, humility, and courage. Courage to ask uncomfortable questions. Courage to say, "I don't know." Courage to stand apart from the crowd when the crowd is wrong. A smart person is not one who memorizes answers, but one who understands the questions. Not one who echoes popular narratives, but one who examines assumptions. Intelligence is not accidental, it is cultivated. It is forged through disciplined thinking, moral clarity, and an unwavering commitment to truth, regardless of the cost. Tonight, we will explore what it truly means to become a smart person in today's world. Not according to trends or algorithms, but according to timeless principles that withstand deception, distraction, and decay. We live in an age that has confused accumulation with comprehension. Never before have human beings had access to so many facts, statistics, opinions, and data points, yet never before has there been such widespread confusion about what is true. Information is abundant, but intelligence is not. The modern world assumes that if you know more, you must be smarter. That assumption is profoundly flawed. Knowing facts does not equal understanding reality, just as owning tools does not make one a craftsman. Information is passive. It can be stored, shared, copied, and repeated without ever being understood. Intelligence, on the other hand, is active. It involves synthesis, evaluation, and judgment. A person can recite headlines, quote experts, and reference studies, yet still lack the ability to reason. Intelligence is not the quantity of data you possess, but the quality of thinking you apply to it. Data answers what, but intelligence asks why, how, and what follows. In today's world, information is often weaponized. Algorithms do not reward truth, they reward engagement. Sensationalism spreads faster than accuracy, and repetition is mistaken for validation. When the same idea is heard often enough, it begins to feel true, regardless of its substance. This creates an illusion of intelligence. People feel informed because they are familiar with narratives, even if those narratives are shallow, distorted, or false. Familiarity replaces verification, and confidence replaces competence. True intelligence requires discernment. Discernment is the ability to separate what is relevant from what is irrelevant, what is true from what is persuasive, and what is meaningful from what is merely popular. This cannot be downloaded or outsourced. It demands effort. It requires the discipline to slow down in a culture obsessed with speed, and the willingness to doubt in a culture that punishes skepticism. A smart person understands that facts do not interpret themselves. Every piece of information arrives wrapped in assumptions, context, and intent. Who is speaking? Why are they speaking? What are they not saying? What must be assumed for this claim to be true? Intelligence begins when we interrogate information rather than consuming it passively. Without this process, information becomes noise, and noise becomes confusion. There is also a moral dimension to intelligence that is often ignored. Knowledge without wisdom can be dangerous. History is filled with brilliant minds that lacked moral grounding, producing systems and technologies that harmed rather than helped humanity. Intelligence divorced from truth becomes cleverness, and cleverness without ethics becomes manipulation. A truly smart person understands that how information is used matters as much as what information is known. Another illusion of modern intelligence is the belief that access equals mastery. Search engines give answers in seconds, but answers are not understanding. Understanding takes time, reflection, and integration. Wisdom cannot be skimmed. It must be wrestled with. It requires the humility to admit gaps in knowledge and the patience to pursue depth instead of breadth. The smartest people are not those who speak the most, but those who listen carefully and think deeply. Intelligence is revealed not by how much someone knows, but by how they think when information is incomplete, contradictory, or uncomfortable. Can they hold tension without rushing to conclusions? Can they revise their views when evidence demands it? Can they distinguish between certainty and truth? In a world overflowing with information, the truly smart person is not the one who collects more data, but the one who understands what data cannot provide and seeks wisdom beyond it. The modern world trains people to consume, not to discern. From the moment we wake up, information floods our senses. Notifications, headlines, opinions, videos, statistics, each demanding attention and offering certainty. The danger is not that we lack access to ideas, but that we rarely pause to examine them. Discernment is the ability to judge rightly, to evaluate claims, and to distinguish truth from persuasion. Without it, even the most educated person becomes vulnerable to deception. Consumption is effortless. Discernment is costly. It requires mental energy, patience, and moral courage. The consumer asks, "What's new?" The discerning mind asks, "Is this true?" In a culture that rewards speed, discernment feels slow. In a society that prizes agreement, discernment feels rebellious. Yet without it, intelligence collapses into conformity. People begin to think they are thinking, when in reality they are only repeating. One of the great illusions of our age is that consensus equals correctness. When an idea is widely accepted, it gains authority by repetition rather than by proof. Discernment challenges this illusion. It recognizes that truth is not democratic. History repeatedly shows that majorities can be confidently wrong, sometimes catastrophically so. A smart person understands that popularity is not a credential, and that truth often begins as a minority position. Discernment also involves recognizing framing. Information is never neutral. Every message is shaped by language, emphasis, and omission. What is highlighted? What is minimized? What emotional response is being provoked? Fear, outrage, and pride are powerful tools of persuasion because they bypass reason. When emotions are activated, critical thinking is suppressed. Discernment requires emotional discipline, the ability to pause, to question one's own reactions, and to refuse manipulation. Another critical aspect of discernment is understanding incentives. People and institutions act in alignment with what rewards them. Media outlets seek attention. Corporations seek profit. Governments seek control. Individuals seek validation. This does not automatically make them evil, but it does mean their messages are not disinterested. A discerning mind asks, "Who benefits if I believe this?" That single question can dismantle a surprising number of false narratives. Discernment also means knowing the limits of expertise. Experts are valuable, but expertise is narrow. A specialist may know a great deal about a small domain while being profoundly mistaken outside it. Intelligence does not mean rejecting expertise, but it does mean resisting blind trust. Smart people evaluate arguments, not titles. They examine evidence, not reputations. Authority can inform thinking, but it must never replace it. Perhaps most importantly, discernment begins with humility. The person who assumes they cannot be deceived already has been. Intellectual pride blinds perception and hardens beliefs. A discerning individual remains teachable, aware that understanding is always partial. This humility creates resilience, the ability to adjust when new information emerges without experiencing identity collapse. In the end, discernment is not about suspicion, it is about stewardship of the mind. It is the recognition that what we allow into our thinking shapes our decisions, our character, and ultimately our destiny. In a world that profits from distraction and confusion, discernment is an act of intelligence and an act of quiet defiance. The difference between shallow thinking and deep intelligence is not creativity or IQ, but foundations. Most people think from conclusions backward. They begin with opinions handed to them by culture, media, or social groups, and then selectively gather information that supports those conclusions. This feels like thinking, but it is actually reinforcement. First principles thinking reverses that process. It strips ideas down to their most basic truths and rebuilds understanding from the ground up. A smart person learns to ask foundational questions. What is real? What can be known? What assumptions must be true for this idea to stand? Every belief system, every ideology, every claim rests on presuppositions. When those presuppositions are false or unexamined, everything built upon them becomes unstable. Intelligence begins when we identify those hidden assumptions and test them rather than inheriting them. Modern culture discourages this kind of thinking because it is disruptive. First principles expose contradictions. They reveal when two widely held beliefs cannot both be true at the same time. This creates discomfort, and discomfort is often mistaken for danger. As a result, many people prefer intellectual comfort over intellectual honesty. They settle for borrowed frameworks rather than earned understanding. First principles thinking also guards against manipulation. When you understand the fundamentals, you are harder to deceive with surface-level arguments. You recognize when complex language is being used to obscure weak reasoning. You notice when emotional appeal substitutes for evidence. You can trace claims back to their roots and see whether they actually connect to reality or merely sound impressive. Another strength of this approach is clarity. Complexity often masks confusion. Truly intelligent thinkers seek simplicity, not simplistic answers, but clear ones. They reduce problems to their essential elements so they can be understood and addressed. This does not mean ignoring nuance. It means refusing unnecessary complication. Truth, when properly understood, is coherent. When ideas contradict themselves, it is not a sign of depth, but of error. First principles thinking also demands patience. It is slower than reacting to headlines or trending opinions. It requires study, reflection, and the willingness to sit with unresolved questions. In a world addicted to instant answers, this patience appears unproductive. Yet it is precisely this slowness that produces depth. Intelligence grows in the spaces where quick certainty is resisted. There is also a moral courage involved. Thinking from first principles often leads to conclusions that are unpopular. When foundational truths conflict with cultural narratives, the intelligent person must choose between honesty and approval. This is where many abandon independent thought. The cost of clarity can be social isolation, misunderstanding, or ridicule. Yet history shows that progress has always depended on individuals willing to think clearly before thinking safely. First principles thinking aligns intelligence with reality rather than fashion. It anchors understanding in what is true rather than what is trending. A smart person does not outsource their worldview. They build it carefully, testing each piece, aware that a strong structure depends on a solid foundation. In a time of shifting narratives and fragile ideas, intelligence belongs to those who know what they believe and why. Intelligence is not merely the ability to analyze isolated facts, but the capacity to recognize patterns that reveal deeper meaning. The world is not a collection of random events. It is a system of interrelated causes and consequences. A smart person learns to look beyond surface appearances and ask how things connect. Pattern recognition is what separates information from insight and observation from understanding. Most people are trained to think in fragments. News is consumed in headlines, education is divided into subjects, and problems are addressed in isolation. This fragmentation obscures reality. Patterns only emerge when information is integrated. Intelligence grows when we ask how economics affects culture, how technology shapes behavior, how ideas influence history, and how human nature remains remarkably consistent across time. When connections are seen, confusion begins to dissolve. Patterns also expose predictability. While technologies change, human motivations rarely do. Fear, pride, greed, power, and belonging have driven human behavior for thousands of years. A smart person studies history not as a list of dates, but as a record of repeating dynamics. When the same conditions appear, similar outcomes follow. This does not mean history repeats exactly, but it does rhyme. Recognizing those rhymes allows one to anticipate consequences rather than be surprised by them. Another aspect of pattern recognition is distinguishing signal from noise. Not everything that happens is equally important. Some events are symptoms, others are causes. The intelligent mind looks for underlying structures rather than reacting to every fluctuation. This perspective prevents emotional whiplash and reactive thinking. Instead of being controlled by the latest crisis, a smart person asks what long-term pattern is unfolding and where it is likely to lead. Patterns also reveal inconsistencies. When ideas contradict observed reality or their own stated principles, something is wrong. Intelligent thinkers pay attention to these fractures. They notice when promised outcomes never materialize, when incentives produce unintended results, or when rhetoric diverges from action. These inconsistencies are not trivial, they are diagnostic. They point to flawed assumptions beneath the surface. Pattern recognition requires distance. When immersed too deeply in the moment, everything feels unprecedented. Stepping back provides scale. This is why perspective is essential to intelligence. The ability to zoom out, to compare present circumstances with broader contexts, allows wisdom to emerge. Short-term thinking reacts, long-term thinking understands. There is also a caution here. Humans are naturally inclined to see patterns, even where none exist. Intelligence requires discipline to distinguish real connections from imagined ones. This demands evidence, consistency, and restraint. A smart person remains aware of cognitive biases and resists forcing patterns to fit preconceived narratives. Pattern recognition must serve truth, not ideology. Intelligence is not about knowing more details, but about seeing more clearly. When patterns are understood, decisions improve, fear diminishes, and confusion gives way to coherence. The smart person does not merely watch events unfold, they understand why they unfold. In a chaotic world, this ability to perceive order beneath complexity is one of the highest forms of intelligence. Intelligence cannot be separated from morality without consequences. A society may produce brilliant thinkers, advanced technologies, and sophisticated systems, yet still descend into chaos if truth and accountability are absent. Wisdom is not merely the ability to solve problems, but the ability to recognize which problems should be solved at all. When moral frameworks erode, intelligence becomes a tool without direction, powerful but dangerous. Modern culture often treats morality as subjective, flexible, or negotiable. Truth is reframed as personal preference, and accountability is viewed as oppression. This creates a vacuum. Into that vacuum rushes manipulation, because when there is no shared standard of truth, power determines reality. The smartest person in such a system is not the wisest, but the most persuasive. Intelligence, divorced from morality, becomes cleverness, and cleverness serves whoever controls the narrative. A moral framework provides boundaries for intelligence. Boundaries are not limitations, they are guides. Just as physical laws allow engineering to function, moral laws allow human systems to endure. Without them, societies collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. History repeatedly demonstrates that civilizations do not fall because they lack intelligence, but because they misuse it. Truth is the cornerstone of any moral framework. Without truth, reasoning has no anchor. Lies can be layered endlessly, but they require constant maintenance and eventually collapse. A smart person understands that short-term gains achieved through deception always produce long-term losses. Integrity may be costly in the moment, but it compounds over time. Deception may appear efficient, but it is structurally unstable. Accountability is equally essential. Intelligence without accountability leads to arrogance. When people believe they will never be held responsible for their decisions, they stop considering consequences beyond themselves. This mindset corrodes judgment. A truly smart person thinks in terms of outcomes, not intentions. They ask not only, "Can this be done?" but "What will this produce?" and "Who will bear the cost?" Moral intelligence also requires courage. Standing for truth often invites resistance. It is easier to remain silent, to compromise, or to rationalize, but intelligence that avoids responsibility becomes complicity. The smartest individuals in history were often not the most celebrated in their time because clarity threatens comfortable illusions. Moral courage is the willingness to align one's thinking and actions with truth, even when it is unpopular. There is also a personal dimension. Moral clarity sharpens perception. When someone consistently violates their own conscience, they begin to justify error rather than correct it. This self-deception dulls intelligence. Over time, the mind becomes skilled at rationalizing instead of reasoning. A smart person guards against this by aligning belief, speech, and action. Consistency strengthens clarity. Intelligence reaches its highest form when it is guided by truth, restrained by ethics, and directed toward good. Knowledge tells us what is possible. Morality tells us what is right. Wisdom emerges only when the two are united. In a world increasingly impressed by brilliance but indifferent to character, true intelligence stands out, not by how much it knows, but by how faithfully it serves truth. One of the great paradoxes of intelligence is that it grows only where humility exists. The moment a person believes they have arrived intellectually, learning slows and eventually stops. Pride creates a closed system. Humility keeps the mind open. In today's world, where confidence is often mistaken for competence, humility has been mischaracterized as weakness. In reality, it is one of the strongest indicators of genuine intelligence. A smart person understands how much there is to not know. The more deeply one studies any subject, the more apparent its complexity becomes. Superficial knowledge produces certainty, deep understanding produces caution. This is why the loudest voices are often the least informed. Humility tempers certainty and invites curiosity. It allows questions to remain unanswered without triggering anxiety or defensiveness. Humility also enables correction. Intelligence is not the absence of error, but the ability to recognize and correct it. People who attach their identity to their opinions cannot change their minds without feeling threatened. As a result, they defend beliefs long after evidence has undermined them. A humble mind, by contrast, sees revision not as failure, but as progress. Changing one's mind in light of new information is not weakness, it is intelligence in motion. Learning requires vulnerability. To learn, one must admit ignorance. This is uncomfortable in a culture that rewards performance and punishes uncertainty. Yet every advance in understanding begins with the acknowledgement of limitation. The smartest individuals ask better questions, not because they know more, but because they recognize what they do not yet understand. Humility fuels this process by removing the need to appear knowledgeable. There is also a social dimension. Humility improves listening. A person who assumes they might be wrong listens differently than one who assumes they are right. They listen to understand rather than to respond. This deep listening uncovers insights that argument never reveals. Many ideas are dismissed not because they are false, but because they are poorly heard. Humility creates space for ideas to be examined rather than immediately rejected. Humility also protects against intellectual isolation. When people believe they have nothing to learn from others, they sever themselves from collective wisdom. Intelligence flourishes in dialogue, not monologue. Exposure to different perspectives, disciplines, and experiences challenges assumptions and sharpens thinking. A humble person seeks these encounters, not to validate themselves, but to refine their understanding. There is a moral component as well. Humility aligns intelligence with responsibility. It reminds us that knowledge carries weight and consequences. When intelligence is coupled with arrogance, it becomes reckless. When coupled with humility, it becomes careful and constructive. The humble mind considers impact, not just correctness. Ultimately, humility is not self-doubt. It is accurate self-assessment. It recognizes both capacity and limitation. It is the quiet confidence that truth does not depend on ego. In a world obsessed with being right, the truly smart person is committed to being accurate. That commitment requires humility, because truth, unlike pride, does not yield to force. The highest form of intelligence is not confined to the present moment. It considers trajectories, consequences, and meanings that extend beyond immediate gratification. An eternal perspective does not require speculation about the future for its own sake. It requires the recognition that actions ripple forward in ways that are often invisible at first. A smart person thinks beyond now, beyond self, and beyond convenience. Modern culture trains people to prioritize the urgent over the important. Short-term rewards dominate decision-making, while long-term consequences are ignored or deferred. This produces a kind of functional stupidity, highly capable individuals making short-sighted choices that undermine their own future. Intelligence matures when time is factored into thinking. What will this belief produce in 10 years? What will this policy create in a generation? What will this habit shape over a lifetime? An eternal perspective also reshapes values. When life is viewed only through the lens of immediacy, success is measured by visibility, wealth, or influence. When perspective widens, success is measured by impact, integrity, and legacy. Smart people understand that what is applauded today may be regretted tomorrow, and what is ignored today may matter most in the end. They resist trading permanence for applause. This perspective also brings restraint. Just because something can be done does not mean it should be done. Intelligence that ignores ultimate consequences becomes reckless. When thinking includes accountability beyond the immediate system, beyond trends, institutions, or personal gain, judgment improves. Decisions are weighed not only by efficiency, but by meaning. An eternal perspective also anchors hope. Without it, intelligence can become cynical. When problems appear unsolvable and systems seem corrupt, the mind may retreat into despair or nihilism. But when thinking is framed by a larger horizon, present chaos is placed in context. Difficulty becomes temporary, and truth becomes enduring. This does not eliminate responsibility, it deepens it. There is also clarity that comes from this view. Many modern anxieties stem from overestimating the importance of transient things. When perspective expands, fear diminishes. Loss is evaluated differently. Failure is contextualized. The smart person is not paralyzed by every setback because they understand that not every battle determines the war and not every moment defines the story. An eternal perspective also disciplines ambition. It asks not only how high one can climb, but why. Intelligence guided by this perspective seeks alignment rather than domination. It recognizes that power without purpose corrodes the soul and destabilizes society. Wisdom aims not merely to succeed, but to be faithful to what is true. Ultimately, intelligence reaches its fullest expression when it accounts for more than the present, more than the visible, and more than the measurable. The smartest person is not the one who masters the moment, but the one who understands where the moment fits in the larger arc of reality. In a world obsessed with immediacy, the ability to think eternally is not only rare, it is profoundly intelligent.